I don't think a lot of people realize how much goes into the planning and development of a vineyard.
And I look at Sauvignon Blanc too, as it can be very transparent of the farming style.
A lot of people don't realize Sonoma County is 1 million acres. Makes us about the size of Rhode Island as a state.
For most people who are really into wine, being a wine dude, a wine nut, or whatever you want to call it, I think they all have a wet dream to make their own wine eventually.
I really have fun with doing my job, with doing wine, with being viticulturist.
You know, to stay out of the vineyard, I only have the shotgun for the bore, and I'm thinking, great.
As much as I love Chardonnay, I didn't want to spend my nights worrying about it and my days talking about it.
I worked 14 hours the day before I went into labor. I was determined to get most of that Chardonnay in.
Another beautiful sunny day in Napa Valley, in a room full of half crazy, half passionate people. I mean, how bad could it be?
We say, so drink the wine. That's kind of our motto here at Life Between the Vines. One of the cool things about wine, besides drinking it, is the people you drink it with. And the stories you hear and tell with wine all come together to make every bottle unique. Discovering and tasting wine shouldn't be a homework assignment. And we believe that the people who are closest to wine have the best stories. So open a bottle.
And welcome to podcast number 198. This week we feature Phil Burton and his daughter Heather of Barrel Builders in Calistoga. One of the key ingredients in the winemaking process is the barrel, an expensive one too. The average wine lover usually doesn't get the chance to look behind the scenes when it comes to barrels and coopers. But for this program, we met with Phil Burton of Barrel Builders in Napa Valley. Barrel Builders has a long history of supplying barrels in Napa, and we were lucky enough to spend a little time with Phil, as well as his daughter Heather, at their facility in Calistoga. So I'm here with Phil Burton of Barrel Builders, and we're up in Calistoga. How are you doing today, Phil?
Good, fine. Pleasure to have you here, and it's not even too sunny today.
No, it's been kind of weird. It's been overcast compared to yesterday, which was screaming sun all day.
It could easily be 105 here today, so this is a blessing, especially with a wine auction in town. So,
first things first, tell me about Barrel Builders.
Barrel Builders was started in 1972 by a couple of Mondavi employees. Robert Mondavi was one of the first to really bring in French oak barrels and make them part of their wine program. In those days, the barrels were made in France, disassembled for shipping, and then reassembled and finished here in the States. So the cooper just sent over a couple of coopers to work with the Mondavi employees and teach them how to put barrels back together. After a while, the employees, not being dumb, thought they were onto something here and quit Mondavi and started Barrel Builders, and that was in 1972. I came to work for them in 1974 as an apprentice cooper, and I've been here ever since. This has sort of been the school, the incubator for coopers around. Most of the cooperages around have employees here or owners that started at one time or another and learned at Barrel Builders here. Because in Europe, you can go to school to learn to be a cooper. Here, you can't. You have to do it in one of the cooperages.
On-the-job training kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the woodworking skills help, but there are a lot of stuff that's specific to working with wood barrels.
Do you own the company now, or?
I do. In 1986, 4 of us employees bought the company from the old owners, and I bought out my last partner in 1990. So I've sort of worn most of the hats in the company here, although I have a foreman now who's French trained. He went to school for it, as you can in Europe. French trained, who could run circles around me on a bad day. So he's very good at what he does.
What's your process that you go through here in terms of barrels?
This is not our manufacturing cooperage. We built the first modern cooperage on the West Coast and sold that to our French companies quite a few years ago. But what we do here is we're set up to make individual staves, one-offs, and custom work rather than the assembly line production of barrels. So we do not only the warranty work for almost all the cooperages around here, all the suppliers around here. We make barrels, off-size barrels, work on tanks. A barrel does 3 things for the wine. One is it holds typically 60 gallons of wine, so it's a storage container. 2 is the barrel breathes, so the wine ages and matures in the barrel. There's some slow transpiration through the wood. And with care, a barrel will do that for decades. But the third thing, the imparting of some oak characters into the wine, diminishes rapidly, and after 3 or 4 years, those flavors are gone, or you'd have to leave the wine in the barrel so long it just doesn't make economic sense. So in this case, one of the things we do is, and we have a machine over here that does it, we can take a barrel apart and carve about 1/4 of an inch out of the inside of the barrel. And it gets rid of the spent wood, it exposes new wood. Typically, we'll put it over a fire afterwards and re-toast it up again, so very similar to the original barrel. And so you can do that for about $150 a barrel. So while not being perfect, it extends the life of the barrel by a couple of more years.
That's not a bad deal, though, to be able to, give it a little extra life.
That's true. Well, the other thing that goes on with barrels is that barrels are obviously easily contaminated. You know that wine it's vinegar. Everybody's had your bottle of wine that sits around the house for 3 or 4 days before you finish it. That vinegar tastes a little bit as acetobacter starting to grow in the barrel. So barrels can grow some stuff, although wine is pretty antiseptic. It's low pH and the alcohols, and typically they have some sulfites in them that also decrease microbial growth.
Okay, so now as we stand here, just looking around, I see behind you what looks like new barrels to me. Am I right about that?
Yeah, there's both new and used barrels here. We have a bunch of new barrels here in the warehouse. We'll take a little wander through in a minute. But these are just some barrels we're working on. I believe these are from Steel Winery.
And what happens with these wineries, these barrels? Are these the ones you're going to cut that inside like you're saying, or?
Yeah, these are barrels we brought in from a customer to cut. Not every winery likes to do it, and certainly the highest and most premium wineries would shudder at the thought of doing this. But wineries in the trenches more that have a budget to look after and stuff like this is much more commonly done.
Do you do anything to the exterior as well, or no?
We can sand it. We can make them look virtually new. But again, it's just the cost effectiveness of it. Maybe a winery will do the first row, right by the tasting room in new barrels, or, barrels that we've cleaned up perfectly. But in the back, sort of, this is production area. Priorities are a little different. So
again, I'm going to go back to these new barrels behind you. I see a couple of typical sized barrels. Then I see some much smaller ones off to the side there.
The typical barrels, incidentally, come in a couple of sizes. The standard that you'll see throughout wineries is 225 liter. And those come in 2 sizes, sort of an interesting story. This size is a little larger than this size. This is called a Bordeaux style barrel. They both hold virtually the same, within a couple of liters of each other. But the Bordeaux style barrel is typically used for Bordeaux varietals. Hundreds of years ago, of course, in France, Burgundy was a long ways by foot or horseback from the Bordeaux region. So Burgundy barrels came out. They're a little shorter and squattier. Typically, people used to say that when the barrels are toasted, and they're typically toasted over a wood fire, they have to be bent a little more to make this extra bend. That extra bend means they get toasted a little more, and wines like Pinot Noir that traditionally were toasted a little more heavily lived in these barrels. Although nowadays it doesn't matter. You can get whatever toast level you want and whatever style of barrels. These smaller barrels over here are something the guys do when it gets slow. We'll take 60-gallon barrels, especially used, shave them, clean them up, and then cut them down to make 30-gallon barrels out of them. Typically, these are used for home winemakers, because if you're making wine, 30 gallons of wine is still a lot of wine to handle. So.
And these are a little bit easier to deal with physically.
Easier to deal with, easier to carry, easier to store, yes. Yeah. So.
And obviously they haven't been toasted yet.
They probably have been already.
Okay,
so
now I can see the
toasted. So if you look at the barrel, it's right where the heads meet.
Yeah, I'm looking at a barrel that's not fully put together.
No, this is one we did as a demo.
Yeah, that wouldn't hold wine very well right now.
We typically, the guys just did a demo. Sunset Magazine just moved to Sonoma, I guess, moved their headquarters. And we had guys down there doing demo for the weekend. And then we do, for our clients and customers, we'll often do demos during their open house days or winery days. It's always a nice thing for the tourists.
So you do toasting here then?
Yeah.
Where do you do that at?
Just right outside here.
Okay.
It's pretty smoky and, of course, create some sparks and other stuff. So it's not something you want to do in the building. Typically, in the cooperage we built, we put in a room that's all metal, stainless steel with big vents and screens to prevent any kind of stuff escaping. Obviously here in Northern California where it's hot and dry. And we try to do it early in the morning because that room must be 120 by noon. It's very difficult, especially, you can toast barrels in several different toast levels. Light or medium, and we have a couple of proprietary toast levels, but occasionally people want heavy toast, which means you get the interior of the barrel dark brown, and it's not black like a charred like a whiskey barrel, but it's dark brown. And the difference between dark brown and on fire is about 10 degrees. So it's a balancing act that the guys have to do. Obviously, you want to do that outside rather than inside.
How long does it take to toast a barrel, average?
If the guys are doing toasting barrel right, you take the barrel when you start to put it over a fire, maybe over a fire for 20 minutes or 30 minutes till the outside of the barrel gets hot. That'll soften the wood enough to get the bend in it. Then from there, you put it over another fire, which is the toasting fire, and that can take half an hour or 45 minutes. And occasionally you'll see, this is an interesting thing as you're just strolling through the winery, occasionally you'll see the bung stave, and we can look at a couple of these, is the stave where the hole is that's filled and emptied at. That's the weakest part of the barrel at the bilge, which is the fat part, is right there. And occasionally you'll see it crack there, or you'll see other cracks at the bilge and staves. What that probably means is, it could be a vagary of wood or a little knot or something, but typically it means the barrel wasn't heated quite enough when it was toasted. So if you see a barrel in particular with 3 or 4 of these on, you know that it was Friday afternoon, the guy has 8 more barrels to toast and he has a date in an hour. You know the fire gets bigger and the firing time gets shorter. But by and large, it's probably 20 minutes, half an hour on the first fire and another 20 minutes, half an hour on the second fire.
So about how many barrels do you go through, say, in a month through here?
Boy, several hundred. Yeah. I mean, we're busy all the time, and it depends. There are a lot of barrel suppliers now and several manufacturing cooperages now, but the demand, of course, is huge. There's the proliferation of wineries, as you'll see, is something to behold. In Napa Valley now, I don't know how many there are, but it's 400 maybe in the Napa Valley.
Well, just the association alone is over 500.
500, okay. Well, see, I'm not. I only checked last week. Sorry, I missed 100.
So yeah, why don't you go ahead and show us around? Let's see what.
Okay. Why don't we wander around a little bit? This is where we do a lot of our work in here in the shop, and it's just been cleaned up for the weekend. So there's loose staves, raw staves. There's some piles of wood back there. This is an interesting. Why don't we wander back here first? One of the things, as I said, a barrel does 3 things. It holds 60 gallons. It breathes and ages the wine, but that oak flavor is leached. This is a barrel that has been just done and do that. So you can see the old things, and then this is put on a sander. But you can see that this has been cleaned out, and then it will be done with a sander to make it really smooth on the inside. But now there's new oak exposed here. Another alternative to doing that, instead of putting the wine in the barrel, put the barrel in the wine, so to speak. And this is something we do a lot of. Let me see if I can find some loose pieces. Here's one, let me grab this over here. This is a selection of wood pieces. This is probably French oak, which is almost all we use. And what they do, and these were rejects for one reason or another, but these are toasted, dried and toasted just like a stave would be, but if the stave has a knot or another reason to reject it, it's put aside and cut into these slats. And so these slats can go inside a barrel. So the barrel holds the 60 gallons and breathes the wine, and then the oak flavors get leached out of these inserts, and we do several thousand of these annually. Wow. We just shipped 400 up to winery in Oregon.
And I'm assuming those are a one-shot deal, right?
You can probably get 2 fills out of them. I think that's what the winery that uses them for. And this winery is huge. They do 4,000 or 5,000 a year. So this is just one of a lump of them we'll set up. And they use the barrels for 2 years and then are considered, trash cans. The price of used barrels is another big thing. As I said, a new French oak barrel costs almost $1,000. After a couple of years, it drops in. Say we're buying 2013 French oak barrels in good condition now for $50. So that's how you think your car depreciates quickly. Don't hold a candle to what barrels do, and that fluctuates radically. For instance, there were 3 years. We had 3 back-to-back years of really good large harvests here, especially in the West Coast. Last year was not disastrous, but certainly a small and much smaller thing. The price of used barrels now has gone down so much, it's literally half of what it was even a year ago or 8 months ago. Wow. So this fluctuates radically. Nowadays, we just loaded up a couple of containers the other day. We're shipping French oak barrels made in France, shipped here. We're shipping them back to Spain. So the round robin effect here. So.
Well, that makes complete sense.
So if you know what sense that makes, let me know.
No, I'm not able to figure it out. So I'm seeing obviously a bunch of staves behind you. So these are going to be eventually barrels, I'm assuming. I mean,
actually, these staves here, we wouldn't let them get dirty like this if they were. So what these staves will be is cut up and burned when we toast barrels later on.
So they're like the fuel.
It's a source of wood. Yeah. So, but we try to, there, as I said, there's a potential of contamination across things. So we don't, for instance, like we don't keep new barrels in here very much. We keep them in the big part of the warehouse. Why don't we wander over there?
Let's go. So we're back in your warehouse here. Tell me about what we're looking at. I see a lot of obviously used barrels, some new barrels.
Most of these are used barrels. We buy used barrels from several client wineries typically, and they're larger wineries. We have one winery alone. We bought 1,000 barrels from them this year. Wow. Well, we know how they take care of their barrels. We can expect it. They know that we'll buy their barrels from them. So it's a sort of a closed loop. Not all of these are ours. We rent some space being at a premium, particularly in the Napa Valley, rent some space to a couple of other people to hold barrels for them for a period of months. And we maintain them. One of the problems with barrels is that, of course, anything made of wood, when a barrel is new and put together, typically there's about between 11 and 13% moisture in the wood, meaning it's very dry. Mm-hmm. So when the barrel's made, it should stay tight. But when it gets filled for the first time or whatever, when it's full of wine, the wood swells up, it absorbs water. And do that, the hoops look like they're solid, but they're not. They're really malleable. So as the barrel stretches, the hoops stretch too.
So that's where they're kind of doing their job.
So that's what they're supposed to do. But now if you let the barrel dry out again, like in California, where it's 15 or 20% ambient humidity, the barrels shrink down. And of course, what happens? The hoops don't shrink back with it. And so you do that. So barrels have to be maintained during that. And our guys spend a whole lot of their time. These stacks are numbered and labeled, and we spend quite a bit of time taking them outside, rehydrating them, emptying them, and sulfuring them, which is sulfur dioxide is used throughout the industry as a preservative and preventative. But anyway, let's wander through the cooperage a little bit. So these are used barrels. They're put aside. Typically, the most valuable used barrels are white barrels. Barrels have been used for white wine for a couple of reasons. One is they tend to be cleaner than red barrels. And the other one is they can be used for either red or white wine, whereas a used red barrel can only be used for, but here are some Smith Madrone barrels.
Oh, nice.
So that we bought, they buy a lot of new barrels from us. They're virtually 100% our barrels. So when they're empty, it's the least we can do to buy the barrels back from them and do that, just help the cycle go.
Yeah, right.
This came from the wineries Alpha Omega. Marca is the cooperage that made the barrel. Goupil is one of the forest areas in France. Although this season aren't disappointed. Artisanal is probably a proprietary name for how they handle the wood or the toasting, and it's vintage. It was made in 2012. So there's quite a bit of information on the barrel itself. There's certain areas in France that obviously stones throw apart because the country is not that big, but people are sure that one area makes different tasting barrels than another, the terroir of trees, so to speak. I think it's not as important as a lot of people think. And so now a lot of people have gone to, say, tight grain versus medium grain and extra tight grain and all that in lieu of it, because it's very difficult to guarantee and know that, is this 100% Goupil? Goupil is a small forest area, and given the demand for barrels worldwide nowadays, I'm not making fun of this cooperage, but it's very difficult to ensure. I think the French Federation of Cooperage says that only 70% of the barrel has to be from the listed wood source if you're going to list a source. So
sounds kind of like wine.
My office and most of our new barrels are stored in another warehouse. So I'm in Santa Elena typically. So this is a little bit not my turf, but
that's okay.
There are some barrels. This is a traditional Burgundy style barrel. Remember, the Burgundy style barrel is a little shorter, and it holds 228 liters, which is about the same. Interesting thing, the heads on these style of barrels tend to warp. So this board is put on here just to keep the heads from warping over a period of time. Without even looking, I can tell you that there are 4 wood pins on each side of the front headboard. There are only 3 in the back on each side. Every manufacturer does it exactly the same way, and nobody knows why. So we've been shipping barrels out here. Typically, as we get barrels in, sometimes they come here to be broken down. These are some of our barrels, the ones that are wrapped, or some new barrels, but we typically get them out to customers right away, or they go to our new barrel warehouse in Santa Helena. Again, this is one of the largest cooperages in France, Nadalier. Jean-Jacques Nadalier. As a matter of fact, they are the people who bought the cooperage from us right up the road here in Calistoga. And so again, this is Noisette is sort of like artisanal. Noisette is their heavy toast. And I'm going to guess that 36 means one of the things with wood, new wood for barrels has a lot of tannins in it. There's a whole group of chemicals variously termed as lumped together as tannins, some harsher than others. So what they do is typically when the stave blanks are made, this is before the barrel is put together and bent, the straight blanks are put out in the weather to age. So a period of time, at least 24 months for European oaks, typically 36 months for American oak, because American oak has even more tannins in it. So the time, the rain and the sun, the elements, microbial stuff that happens in there leaches some of the harsher tannins out of the wood. In this case, for these barrels here, I'm going to guess that this wood barrel was aged at least 36 months. So this was 3 years of aging on it. So the winery here, I think these came from Jordan too. So the winery here decided to pay a little extra money for that little extra aging for a little less of the tannic, a little less of the astringency that you sometimes get out of an oak barrel.
The skill of winemaking.
Yeah, this is definitely another skill. This is obviously one of the 8 million decisions a winemaker has to make annually to come up with the wines that they do.
As we do this interview with Phil, Heather Burton has also been going along with this tour, and Heather is Phil's daughter. And one thing you were talking about was Kentucky barrels. So let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah, we've seen a big push towards sustainability. More and more wineries and winemakers are asking for sustainable options, green options. So in response to that, we have a EBC Kentucky oak barrel. This barrel, almost all the wood is harvested within 30 miles of the cooperage using sustainable harvesting practices. So these forests can be harvested every 50 to 75 years. At the same time, the barrels are produced in a zero waste facility. So every single part of the tree is used. Nothing's wasted. Another sustainable aspect of it is we are donating $3 for every EBC barrel sold to the Kentucky Woodland Owners Association, who's a local nonprofit that works with private landowners to teach them about sustainable economic and environmental harvesting practices. So for us, that's a really big deal. Phil is an avid outdoorsman. I worked as a park ranger for 3 years, so for us, ensuring that our barrels are produced in a sustainable fashion, we're slowly trying to work towards that and incorporate more and more green practices into our products and just our production as a whole as a company. Because for us, that's something we're really passionate about. We're both passionate hikers, outdoors people. He's a bird watcher. And so just to ensure that all those forests are harvested sustainably and they're there for future generations as well.
Isn't that kind of like European in general? I mean, when it comes to the animal and every bit of it's used, right? I mean, that's very European.
Absolutely. It's easy to see a lot of waste that goes into barrel production. With French oak, when they harvest planks, only about 30% of that wood can be harvested, or less than that. It's like 20 to 30% of that plank is actually used for the barrel. So then the question is, what happens to the rest of that wood? At EBC, American oak, with each plank, you can actually harvest about 40% of the plank goes into the barrel, but all the rest of that, they either at EBC, which is the American cooperage that we work with, they take that extra wood and they sell it to a company that uses to make briquettes. They use the higher quality pieces of the plank they use to make chips. And anything that's left over, they use to heat the kilns that they use for their bourbon barrel production. So 100% of the wood is used to ensure that nothing goes to waste. And even when the wood is harvested in the forest, when they cut it down, they cut off all of the branches and then leave that as mulch for the younger trees, thus helping ensure that the younger trees have that healthy mulch to make them grow. Also helping to ensure that, you can harvest the forest every 50 to 75 years.
Phil, this has been really fascinating to walk through your facility and see what you're doing. And of course, part of it that I've learned is that you've brought this whole other side of life to barrels back, not just planters.
No, these barrels certainly have a lot of life in them when they're typically exhausted. As I say, the super ultra premium wineries typically don't do this. This would be a rarity. But working wineries, in the trenches wineries and that kind of stuff, which is the bulk of wineries in the U.S., this is a good tool. And typically, even a new startup, you can't buy all new barrels and use your make wine in them, because you'd over oak your wines before you could get the aging process done. So typically a winery will have some new barrels, some 1-year-old barrels, perhaps some 2 or 3-year-old barrels. And so they'll get, and then blending together, yet another winemaker decision is how to blend and how much to blend of each of these.
Well, and in the end, too, especially if wineries keep opening up here and obviously around the country, you're not going to be bored.
No, we're better than ever. This looks like this crop this year is probably going to be fairly small, maybe a little bigger than last year's crop, which was tiny by comparison to previous years. And again, it's going to be early, so winemakers are a little hesitant to order large quantities of barrels. Sure. But given the number of wineries, it's not a problem.
Yeah, I don't imagine it's going to make a big difference in that regard. For our listeners who'd like to learn a little bit about you online and about what you do, how'd they find out about you?
If you go to our website, barrelbuilders.com, there's a host of information, videos on barrel repair and maintenance, and a couple of blogs that we put together. When I'm on trips, I'm told all the time I should make reports or write notes and things, and I'm very bad at it. But we have an online store and a resources page as well, so that you can look. And we're on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel as well with a host of videos on it about what's going on with our products.
One last question. The average Joe, again, I go back to this home winemaker, so they can contact you and you'd be able to help somebody out in terms of information, what they need if they were a home winemaker?
Oh, sure. We have big customers who buy lots and lots of barrels. That's great. But many years ago, I wrote an editorial that my favorite wineries were the ones where the lees ran down the driveway, which, of course, includes most home winemaking operations as well. And they are my favorites. I enjoy it. There's the passion and the life that people have so much fun doing this stuff. And the wines are often certainly commercial caliber and a lot more fun to drink. So, yeah, I'm happy to help. We're always happy to help home winemakers. And it's a lot of fun.
This was a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to do this.
Learn more by visiting barrelbuilders.com.
Thanks for listening, and remember to like us on Facebook. Also, check out our YouTube channel.
Life Between the Vines is produced at Fifth Floor Recording Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Produced and edited by Ray Pfister. Theme song and original music written and recorded by Tim Dondarevo. Our host is Kay Paskoff. Web design by Jenny Holland. Our graphics and website specialist is Lawton Hall. Our intern is Eden Herbert. Our web geek is Dan Gieshin. Photos by Jeanette Hernyak. Copyright 2016.